Welcome everyone to this week's interview. This week I'm sitting down with Kyle Morris, or as you guys probably know him, KEMMO. Kyle, how are you doing?
It's KEMMO.
I knew I should have asked beforehand, but I got too confident with this, and that's what I get for this.
You're good. Yeah, I'm doing good. Thanks for having me.
But yeah, I'm really excited. Chemo is to me what's really cool is ever since I've known you, your YouTube it's not a cookie cutter. A lot of people follow the same formula, and that's what stood out. So it's something that I'm both I feel like it's cool to call you a friend, but it's also cool just being a fan of your work. So I'm super excited to have you on today.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate it. Yeah, it's an honor to be here. I know, like I said to you, you've been doing a lot of awesome work as well. So it's cool to see how we've kind of grown our channels
Hmm.
together. And I know we sat down probably what, 2.5, 3 years
Yeah.
ago. Now, this is how far we've come since then.
It's like we said, that's it's what content creation on a budget. So it takes a while to get there, but when you get there, it's very nice to be there.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
So but anyway, jumping into it, so I've invited you on here because you have a new project coming out about Nazareth Speedway. I guess kind of a little bit jumping into it for a backstory. For those who don't remember the track or even know about the track, can you tell us a little bit about Nazareth Speedway?
Yeah, of course. So the history of Nazareth Speedway is a long one. You have your current oval configuration that sits abandoned today and has since 2004, but the history of the track actually dates back over 100 years back to the early 1900s. And that's something that also inspired me to go on this personal journey is because my family history in the town of Nazareth is also over 100 years. My family used to have a farm in Nazareth, and so our farm kind of grew up with the track as well, and the farm got closed. I think it was in the early 20s from what I've heard, but obviously, as we know, the track still went on. So the track started, it was a half-mile dirt track, like I said, in the early 1900s. That was where it began. It used to be for horse racing. It wasn't really until the late 40s that they started racing cars there. Off the top of my head, I believe it was like 47 or 48 that the first race was there. That was hosted by the AAA. So that was the small track, the half mile that used to host weekly racing. They used to do demolition derbies out there, auto polo, you name it, they did it. It was always a show out there on the half mile track. So that was considered the small track. And the reason that was considered the small track was then because in 1966 they built the big track as they called it, and that track was a 1.125 mile dirt oval, which at the time was a big track. And even if you look at dirt tracks today across the country, that would be considered a
Mhm.
really big layout as far as local dirt racing. And it was on that track where a lot of the names were made. You had Mario Andretti, Frankie Schneider, the track's winningest driver, Buzzy Rudiman, who you might recognize his son
Yeah.
David Rudiman, former winner of the Coca-Cola 600. A ton of different drivers. You name it, as far as Northeast legendary racers. And there's a pretty good chance that in that era that they raced on the big track at the Nazareth Speedway. Then kind of what happened is that operating two tracks got to be too costly for the owners. So they actually closed the track down in the late 50s, I believe, or no, it wouldn't have been the late 50s. It would have been the late or early 80s. Yeah, early 80s that they closed the track. They closed the big track and the small track. They couldn't just keep it operating anymore financial wise. And that was when Roger Penske came in and he saved the Speedway. And that sort of ushered in the final chapter of the property. He bought the track and paved it to a 0.946 mile track, which that is an interesting story of its own because there's a little bit of a debate there. When kart raced there, they went for an official measurement and they put it at 0.946 miles, and that's what they based all of their race distances. When NASCAR came in there for the Busch Series and the Craftsman Truck Series, they called it a mile and they were happy at that for a day. But the
Hmm.
official measurement is 0.946 6 miles. So it actually opened. This is an interesting stat. When the track opened in 1986 as that asphalt oval, it was called Pennsylvania International Raceway. It wasn't until 1997 that it was rebranded to Nazareth Speedway. So that's kind of a little cool stat there. And then the track continued operating under that Nazareth Speedway name until it closed in 2004. And that's the layout that still sits abandoned today.
Mm-hmm. That's awesome. To me, what's so cool about this stuff is that if you asked me about Nazareth, a month ago, I could sit there and say, "Oh yeah, it was a track and this or that." And but when you released this, I was like, "Man, there's so much about this track that I don't even like know about it." And like we were talking about earlier, like going through the past year and a half with our local track, Somerville Speedway, it was the same way where if you're out of the area, you think it's just a racetrack, then you dive into it and you realize, no, there's so much here. Like there's just even just doing a small series or a small documentary doesn't, doesn't do it justice. You can do books. And so
Oh, yeah.
even when I wrote that question to you, I was like, that's gonna be such a hard question for Kyle to be like, okay, how do I tell this in 5 minutes?
I was gonna say that was a very hard one to condense. Good thing you threw that at me. I was
Mm,
actually at the track earlier this afternoon for a couple hours just filming
mm,
some content out there, so I had to brush up on my history a little bit. But I'm sure, as you realize, for your series too,
mm,
even though you're the face of the series and you've lived in the town the whole time, there's a lot of stuff that even you don't know.
yeah.
And I think for me, that's the most rewarding part of the journey, is getting to
Hmm.
go along and hear the stories and that, and learn stuff along the way too, along
Yeah.
with viewers.
That's awesome. So you spoke a little bit about how you have your family has a history, with the town and all, but what kind of sparked your interest in doing a project about the track? Like what was something where you sat down and said, I want to do this documentary covering the track?
So I've always wanted to do something covering Nazareth. Like I said, growing up in the town, I'm a fourth generation Nazareth graduate, so I've always had, obviously the passion for racing, and I've always known about the speedway. So I've always wanted to do something to incorporate, what I do here on my channel. And it actually kind of hit. It was inspired a little bit by my dad hearing his stories going as a fan. But the
Hmm.
person who really sparked this was actually Mario Andretti. It was about 2 months ago. I went to his home, and he gave me a personal tour of his racing collection and of his home. And we were there for about a half hour, 45 minutes. And just in that time, it wasn't really talking about, hey, your IndyCar and your NASCAR and your Formula One success. It was more, hey, tell me about, how you raced at Nazareth, and
Hmm.
what were your beginnings? My aunt and uncle actually owned a building that used to be one of his original race shops when he raced USAC at Nazareth. The gas station that him and his brother Aldo owned. I drive
Hmm.
past that every day on my day to work. So it's little things like that. Just hearing those stories
Hmm.
kind of inspired me and made me realize, how many other stories are out there about this facility that, I can learn along the way, and, kind of like that too, pass along to the viewer as I learn them.
Hmm. That's awesome. So for you, but by the way, the name of the sorry, I had it right here. Things are not cooperating. The project itself is called the Old Historic, which by the way, to me is one of the coolest names I've seen for a documentary. So I was really jealous because I was like, man, that's such a cool cool name for something. But
Well, thank you.
um has there so for you, is there part of the production process that's been your favorite? Maybe it's been an interview, maybe it's been a discovery about the track, figuring out these different facts or stories about the track.
Yeah, of course. Well, first, backtrack a little bit. I was gonna say, from the high school motto. The first line of the alma mater is in the old historic Nazareth. So that's where the inspiration for that comes from. And like I said, just being a fourth generation graduate, paying tribute to my roots and my family's roots. But getting into the series in that, obviously you can't top the interview that I had with Mr. Andretti. Not many people can say they've been able to sit with him at all.
Mhm.
I get to say that I started the series with Mario Andretti as my first guest. And to me, that is something that's incredibly humbling and also incredibly surreal. It puts chills on my bone just
Mhm.
sitting here talking to you about it. Just the stories that that man told me, both on camera and off. The conversations him and I've had are incredible. I've been to his house 3 times now, and
Mhm.
like I said, just the conversations that we've had and the history that I've gained from him has been so incredible. But a real interesting piece that I learned in that not a lot of people are aware of. I was just talking to a gentleman earlier tonight, his name Bill Coop, and he informed me that once the Speedway closed in 2004, the track I
Mhm.
mentioned that's abandoned in that, apparently an interested buyer was none other than Tony Stewart.
Mm.
Before he bought Eldora, he submitted a proposal to the Lower Nazareth Township Board with a blank check saying, I want to expand our State Route 191, State Route 248. He got it approved by the Pennsylvania Department of Transportation, and he went to the Lower Nazareth Township Board trying to get an approval to tear down the asphalt track and just in front of those main grandstands, build a half-mile dirt track where he could
Mm.
do almost like what he does at Eldora.
Yeah.
It obviously shot down. There's a stipulation on the property that it can never be used for motorsports again. But that was really interesting to learn. I never, I kind of assumed that in 2004, once I think it was Dan Weldon who won the final kart race, and that was it
Mhm.
for the track. I think, I kind of assumed, and everyone kind of assumed that, as soon as that checkered flag flew, that was it. We were done with Nazareth, and there was never going to be any talk about it again. But I guess on
Yeah.
the end, Tony Stewart was actually interested in buying it before he went down to Eldora and bought that
Mhm.
track. It's pretty interesting to think, what could happen with that property.
I feel like that's what's cool is when you have a property still there because with Somerville, it's a housing complex. So if you drove there, you would never even know there was ever a racetrack there. But to me, when you see what happened with North Wilkesboro, it kind of gives you hope that as long as there is still something there is still hope for something to be there. Um, I'm sure you probably cover it in your series. So I don't know if it's something you can answer now or if you just need to leave us with a teaser for it. But do you do you think that there is a way that this track can still be used for if it's not racing? Do you think maybe it's you can do concerts there, you can do bike races there, or is it something that you think eventually it's just going to get torn down? I don't know if it's something you cover or not, or if you have a personal opinion on
No,
it.
no, it's actually not something that I cover because it is a little bit of a hard topic.
Uh-huh.
So it's kind of unknown what the future of the track's going to look like. However, the property is owned by David Jandal at the time. And
Hmm.
David Jandal, for those who don't know, on the East Coast here, owns Jandal Turkey Farms. They provide a lot of frozen and fresh turkeys, especially around the holiday season, but year round. So there's been talk that A, it's going to be used for his farming, which I kind of doubt just with how the property is
Hmm.
zoned at, or B, the Lehigh Valley's biggest issue right now, warehousing. There's also a chance that a warehouse gets dropped on that property. But again, with the zoning there, with State Route 191, State Route 248, there's a lot of possibilities the track could go through.
Yeah.
That's part of the reason why the property still sits abandoned and has for 18 years. So
Hmm.
a couple different ways it could go, but I mean, unfortunately, I don't see it being used for any sort of entertainment or
Hmm.
sports.
I gotcha. Um, so as I hate the title content creator because I don't know. I just feel like I'm like, oh, I don't think that describes what a lot of people do or whatever. But do you see yourself wanting to create more documentaries after going through this process, or is this something that was just kind of near and dear to your heart, and you're like, no, this was special. I'm not a documentary maker. I just wanted to tell the story of Nazareth.
Down the road, if another opportunity would present itself, I would
Mm.
definitely consider the idea. But I think, kind of like you said, this was just kind of a special personal passion project.
Yeah.
And even as I sit here doing this interview with you, I'm still ongoing in the process. I'm still,
Mhm.
making phone calls, building connections, and I can't even tell you what some of my guests will be. So
Mhm.
it'll be interesting to look back on this interview a little bit down the road and see how far this series has come.
Mhm.
I can tell you I have 5 interviews recorded right now. Past that, I don't know where this series is going
Mhm.
to go. I can tell you I have a ton of contacts and a ton of messages in my phone. It's just all
Yeah.
about putting those together in that. So I think, it's just a personal and special development seeing this series come together because
Mhm.
of each guest, kind of like I said about it's yes, we sit down for a half hour, 45 minutes and record an interview. But before that, it's building a personal connection,
Yeah.
whether we go up for lunch, visit their home, things like that. It's
Mhm.
building those personal connections as well.
Yeah.
So I think this might just be a one and done thing, but I mean,
Mhm.
I'm definitely open to the idea if something else would present down the road, to definitely take a look into it because it is a very fun process.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's something that's been A, incredibly humbling and B, incredibly enjoyable for me along this journey so far.
Which I know if you're someone out there who just goes online and says, okay, here's a racetrack, let me talk about it. Like, it's to me, it's easy to do a ton of these, but if you take your time to actually get to know the people that are involved in these types of tracks, it's to me, it's crazy how emotional because that the like for me, I was not near as invested. Like I didn't even know the track here in Somerville existed 2 years ago, and someone told me about it, and I was like, oh, there was a racetrack here, okay. But even just having never stepped foot on the property when it was a racetrack, it was crazy how emotional the stuff was. And even a year and a half after getting or year or whatever, getting the videos, I would still get chills watching it. And I know, for you, it's the same thing where it's crazy how just you get absorbed into this isn't. For a lot of people, they remember, oh yeah, like I don't know, Truex won this race, or I remember when so and so almost won, but you start realizing how many people that was their
Mhm.
space. It's hollowed ground or whatever there.
Cool.
Mm,
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely just so surreal. Like I mentioned earlier, I was walking the grounds today recording
mm,
some content for an upcoming episode where we're just going to document the speedway as it sits today. And
mm,
just walking that track, walking in where the motorhome lot was, standing in Victory Lane,
yeah.
standing on top of the media center, and just thinking about the names who walked through there. I mean, the list of winners for Nazareth Speedway, it was a very short history that the pavement track was open.
Mm,
The names that went through there and won, it's an incredible list. And just to think about how that still stands today,
yeah.
albeit run down and abandoned after 18 years of not being used. The fact that it's still there, it can still be visited and can still be preserved and documented is
Mm,
something that is just so cool. And like you said, going along the way and just hearing the stories from the people that was their place,
mm,
it's emotional. I mean, I was born in 2003. The track closed in 2004. So while I was technically around, I was, you asked me something about, oh yeah, do you remember being around for that race that Martin Truex Jr. won? No, I was 7 months old when he won that final Busch
mm,
Series race. But it's about, now being able to go back and even trace it back before the history of the track
yeah.
that's standing today. And just, like I said, hear the stories and build the connections because a lot of these gentlemen are so willing to share their stories and
Mm,
that. And I mean, it's truly incredible the gates that have been opened for me and the friendships that have been made
yeah.
because, I mean, the thing that really hits home for me, it wasn't on camera, but once Mr. Andretti and I finished recording, he looked at me and said, thank you for offering to do this with me. I really
Mm,
appreciate it. And it's an honor. And for somebody of that stature to realize
yeah.
how much it means to him to talk about his roots and his start in racing,
Mm.
that really hit home for me.
And to me too, like it's such a I feel like for a lot of these people, they get approached and they either don't get asked about the speedway, or it
Mhm.
becomes this thing where it's like, don't you think it's stupid? Or it becomes something negative when in
Right.
reality, when you approach and just say, listen, I just want to tell the story. Like I just want viewers out there to be able to say this track was special. Here's
Mhm.
why it was special. And to me, that's like I said, I feel like your work, that's what lends it to. Is that when you announce this project, I knew, okay, I'm not going to be tuning in to just, you try and debate people into, hey, can you, tear down this guy or say something negative. Instead, it's like, oh no, here's going to be, like I don't know what the complete series is, but I feel like it's gonna be a lot of people sitting down saying, well, hey, here's my favorite part, or maybe here's a little bit of a sad story, but it's just stories about here's why this track was why it mattered to people.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And I think it's really weird being the interviewer in this series
Mm,
because instead of sitting there firing questions away like we're doing here, I just sit down and say, look, you know your career,
yeah.
you this place meant to you. All I do is an introduction, a base, how you doing, where'd you get started, and then here's a picture of you racing at the track. Tell me about it.
Yeah.
Where the interview leads is where the interview leads. And just the stories that are told for that is
Hmm.
incredible because even I don't know where the interview is going to go. I don't have a script. I don't have a
Hmm.
set list of questions or anything. So they bring things up like that shock on my face. That's a genuine wow. I can't believe we're talking about this.
um I guess to wrap it up, I've been asking all of our guests this year, if you can narrow it down out of the thousands of NASCAR stock cars or trucks that have been on the track, do you have a favorite paint scheme all time?
Absolutely. That would be the gray ghost. Um, when you threw that question at me, I was thinking long and hard about
Hmm.
paint schemes that, personally really stand out to me.
Yeah.
So I became a NASCAR fan in 2015. Being named Kyle, I was admittedly a Kyle Busch fan. So if you ask me my emotional favorite, it would
Hmm.
obviously be right here over my shoulder. You can see all the M&M's 18s, right? That, that will forever hold a place in my heart.
Hmm.
But past that, if I had to choose any scheme, just the sharp black,
Yeah.
silver, gray, and orange of that gray ghost looks incredible. Yes, I put that above the GM Goodwrench number 3, which by the way, is my second favorite paint scheme all time. It's
Hmm.
honestly a toss-up between those two, but if you look at the color scheme here that I use for the old historic, that's actually inspired by my love of the gray ghost paint
Oh
scheme.
wow. That's awesome. Well, Kyle, for the people watching this, when can they kind of expect the series to start rolling out? As well as where can they find it at online?
Well, all announcements and that will be posted to my Instagram and Twitter's page for the project. That would be at the Old Historic. I also do have a strictly racing page on Instagram. That's at KEMMO Cup Series. And it'll also be on all of my personal social medias at real_KEMMO. The goal is to start rolling out the project this coming Saturday, that being October 1st. However,
Mhm.
that may get pushed back due to editing delays. Like I said, it'll all be communicated out on my social media channels, and it can be found on my channel. That would be KEMMO, all caps KEMMO.
Yeah, it's not chemo out there. So if you're an idiot that thinks it's chemo, it's not right. So
You got it. Yep.
I'll just go to the beginning. I'll edit that out and I'll just do like a voiceover, like "Welcome to chemo." So, but yeah, once again, like I said, I'm a really big fan of your work, and I'm really looking forward to seeing the series. So, thanks again for joining us today.
Hey, well, thanks for having me on, Brandon. Yeah, same to you. I'm a big fan of everything you've been doing with this interview series. It's great to see, and it's awesome to call you a friend as well.
Well, thank you very much.
No problem.